Mr. David Krayden, what's going on?
Nico, nice to be back. Nice to join you this week as we
Ye-
get end of August.
Yeah, it's gonna make for an interesting conversation. Our prime minister is doing everything, seems to be doing everything possible to piss off the U.S. and now is in Europe instead of in the U.S. trying to make a deal. But hey, what do I know, right?
Well, it's very, very disturbing with defense because once again, I don't think we covered this much last week, but of course, he really, really got President Trump upset by negotiating with Saab, it's a Swedish manufacturer of the Gripen fighter jet. And Carney's got this crazy idea that we're going to have 16 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters and possibly another 70 or so of these Saab creations, and an Air Force the size of Canada. And bear in mind, for those listeners, viewers who aren't aware of it, I was a public affairs officer in the Canadian Air Force for over a decade, and I was very involved in this F-35 file. But a country the size of Canada, with an air force of about 100 fighter jets maximum, and at any one time, you're never going to see all of them flying because there's downtime for maintenance and all that sort of thing. But an air force the size of Canada can't accommodate two different fighter jets. And this is how crazy this is, because you need a whole different set of training to fly two different fighter jets, and you need maintenance crews who are trained in doing this. And it's simply not something an Air Force Canada size can do. And this is why this is so crazy. And I know the United States is really down to the two A's in terms of its exports. Agriculture, it still has the most arable land in the world, and armaments. And for Carney to be tweaking Trump's nose over the F-35 is just absolutely stupid behavior at this point. And now, of course, he's talking about buying subs from Turkey. I don't know. And all of this behavior is noticed intently by Donald Trump. And I had retired Colonel Douglas McGregor on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he's focused on this. He said, that's the one thing you don't want to do is sabotage military deals with the United States right now, because that's just basically their chief export. And not only that, if Canada wants to be interoperable with the US, the Royal Air Force as well, Royal Australian Air Force, they're all flying the same jet, the F-35. And these are the partners we deal with most often. We train with them, we operate with them. And the US Air Force, Navy, and Marines are all flying the F-35. So it's simply a case of interoperability, and at this point, just common sense to follow through on this deal. And this is another tragic story in national defense. This goes back to the Chrétien years, the beginning of the Chrétien years, where Canada sort of committed itself to buying this jet at some time. Went through 10 years of Jean Chrétien, 9 years of Stephen Harper, and 8 years of Justin Trudeau before we finally made a decision on this. And now Carney's backing away, and it's absolutely crazy. And that's been my beef for the last couple of weeks. But that now he's in Ukraine talking about boots on the ground. And it's not clear to me what he's talking about, because Russia is not going to tolerate NATO peacekeeping troops, if that's what he's talking about. And it's not clear to me if that's what he's talking about. He's so vague.
He's calling them the coalition of the willing, right?
Yeah.
And this is just a way we were talking about it this week. And the only thing that we could think of is that they named themselves that just so that it's not called NATO, because most of the countries, if not all the countries that are in the coalition of the willing, are also part of NATO. But as you say, they can't show up to Ukraine, a non-NATO country, as NATO. Russia will never allow it. So they invented the coalition of the willing.
Yeah. Well, when's the last time we heard that phrase, coalition of the willing? This is why I find this kind of chilling Nico, because that's what George Herbert Walker Bush, or no, George W. Bush and his father called the coalition that first of all intervened with Iraq in Kuwait and then initiated the second war in Iraq, which was completely unfounded based on this weapons of mass destruction, which were never ever existed. This was a complete fabrication, but that was a coalition of the willing as well. So Carney's deliberately using this kind of language because it's nebulous. It's not clear what he's talking about. Because if he really thinks Canada is going to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, he's crazy. Or does he want to send troops to Ukraine to fight Russia? Because UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been talking about going to war with Russia. Like in the UK, literally cannot defend its own borders anymore. It's incapable. They've got more admirals and battleships. The UK, the Royal Navy used to be the largest navy in history, even bigger than the US Navy or Chinese Navy is today. It's down to more admirals and battleships. Half of its fighter jets aren't operational. They can't even fly. It's got more horses in the army than tanks. So this is all a big charade. And it's the same with Emmanuel Macron, France, talking about going to war with Russia. This is all foolishness and suicide. If any of these countries think they're going to take on Russia and have a localized European war, that's happened before. This is 1914 all over again. And every time that these idiots open their mouths, I think they're sleepwalking into a global conflict that is inevitably going to go nuclear. And so I don't understand why these people are so delusional. I know they're trying to distract people from the economic catastrophe that's looming. I just heard today that Britain is on the verge of applying to the International Monetary Fund for relief. I mean, this is the country that used to be the largest empire in history. It's now on the verge of applying for aid from the IMF. This is something the third world nations used to do. And it's almost like, as the UK becomes more authoritarian, as it locks up more journalists, more, as they call them, keyboard warriors who don't agree with the narrative of Keir Starmer or the British government, it's becoming increasingly impoverished. And this is at the same time they're on the verge of going to the IMF. They're also talking about going to war with Russia. Mm-hmm. And it's all a distraction, of course, because if one of the best ways to get people focused off the economy is to have a war, even if that war means the end of civilization. But I'm just watching this and saying that this is extremely dangerous. It's almost comical, but it's more tragic than comic, because if this thing goes off the rails, and it will very quickly, this could literally be the beginning of a global conflict. And I have been watching this with much trepidation for the past 3 years, because the irresponsibility, the level of irresponsibility from people like Starmer and Macron and now Carney is astronomical. And another $2 billion to Kiev this week, another $2 billion, and it's where it's going. It's going right into the pockets of Zelensky and his corrupt government. And that is what is so incredible about this. It's not just that we're aiding and abetting a war. We're keeping the war going. But we know where this money is going. It's being pocketed by the most corrupt government in Europe. And to me, the Canadians who still are buying this line of standing with Ukraine, the population has been halved in Ukraine since the war began. It went from 42 to 28 million people. And they've lost 1.8 to 2 million people in this war. And people are emigrating out of the country faster than the population can recover. So Ukraine is literally teetering on the brink of collapse. And we continue to pour money into this war, into this country. And we continue to entertain delusional thoughts that somehow we're going to dictate the peace terms to Russia after it's been fighting a war for 3 years. I'm sorry, if you look at history, the victors always dictate the terms, whether it's the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 or whether it's the Allies in 1945. The victors dictate the terms, and not the UK, not France, and not even the US. And I think Donald Trump understands that. I don't know if Starmer or Macron really understand that. They think NATO still has the pull that it once did and during the Cold War. But it's an organization way past its due date. And I served with NATO over in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and in the 90s. I was over there at the same time actually that Colonel McGregor was over there writing the policy. My job was to promulgate the new NATO policy, which at the time I really believed in. But I don't anymore. I don't. I think this is an organization that is desperate for self-justification because there's a lot of people getting paid very well, and there's a lot of people making billions of dollars off the arms trade that NATO necessitates. So
NATO is a hammer that's looking for nails. Because ever since the Cold War, like it was literally put in place after the Second World War. After the Cold War ended in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, they made a deal with Gorbachev to say they wouldn't get involved in any of the countries like Ukraine, like Belarus, but yet what have they been doing? So they're literally just trying to confirm their job. They're a hammer looking for nails. But there's a couple of things you mentioned that I think we need to explore, because one of the things that most people don't realize is you mentioned the $2 extra billion that Carney promised. That makes it $6.3 billion now that he promised since he became prime minister. But one of the things most people don't know is if you look at Brookfield, they have a lot of investment in Ukraine. Since 2022, they have investment in wind energy. It's a Ukrainian wind power project. They have investment in Innovation District IT Park that is worth $160 million. They have a company, because the video that we were talking about, he talks about maybe putting troops on the ground of the Ukraine. He's also referring to drone technology. Well, guess what? Brookfield also owns companies that develop drone technology. They have operation right now in Spanish projects with companies like Wing, which belongs to Google, and it's called Brookfield Aviation Finance. They also own Drone Life, so they mix AI with drone technology. And what people don't know, and this is probably the worst one of them all, they're part of a program called Advantage Ukraine, which is a project in the Ukraine that's going to be responsible for rebuilding the Ukraine. And guess what? Brookfield is heavily invested in building. They do a massive amount of project management. They do a massive amount of rebuild as part of their portfolio. And guess what? They are doing it on Canadian dime now. They're literally sending billions of dollars. You know that this is gonna become a slush fund for Brookfield assets. This is what's going on right now. And obviously, Zelensky, being the highest paid actor in the world, is being used to funnel all that money. And guess what? He's making a boatload of it himself. But that's the situation that we're seeing. And yet the average Canadian is just like, oh, yeah. Let's support Ukraine. Putin bad. Putin is bad. Russia's the problem. But the biggest thing that I'm seeing, and this is where I'm curious to get your opinion on, because it seems that Carney's doing everything possible to piss off the U.S. So just before the deadline of the trade agreement that we had at the beginning of August, within 24 hours, he said that he will support Palestine as a free state at the UN. Then he goes to Ukraine and says that he's going to put boots on the ground if they need to as part of their security commitments, while Trump literally was just with Putin and Zelensky trying to negotiate a peace deal between the two of them. And now you're talking about the F-35s. So doesn't it look like Carney, because Carney's not an idiot. For the people out there that believes that Carney's is like Justin Trudeau, he is not. Read his book. He's a very smart guy. Unfortunately, he's a very smart guy. He knows what he's doing. Do you think this is all done on purpose? What he's doing, that he's doing everything possible to piss off the U.S. so that we are no longer an ally with them?
There's no other explanation because, as I pointed out, this trip to Sweden was essentially booked right before this peace summit in Washington. And Trump excluded Carney from that summit because he sent Melanie Joly and the Secretary of State over to Sweden on the same day the peace summit began. So that was obviously geared to infuriate Donald Trump. It worked. Carney got excluded from the summit, and of course, this is the guy who says he's more European than anything else. And I even have citizenship in European countries, and something he hasn't, by the way, dissolved. He promised to do that, and he hasn't done that. But of course, it's designed to infuriate Donald Trump because Mark Carney is trying to sever our traditional relationship alliance with the United States. And this is an obvious alliance. And to me, it's like trying to put back something that has been dead for generations now. And that's this Eurocentric vision of Canada when it was tied to the UK as the mother country. This goes back to colonial times. We have been a natural extension of the United States since the Second World War. And it's because of geography, and it's because we work very closely with the U.S. on all defense issues, from NORAD to a continental agreement between the U.S. Army and the Canadian Army. We work operationally, we train together, we work together, and that's our natural ally. And to try to forge this Eurocentric alliance now, or more specifically, a globalist one, is very, very dangerous, and it gets hostility going with the United States. But can you say conflict of interest? I mean, that's what Brookfield is all about, and it amazes me that people just say, well, I guess that's business, that's politics. And Carney mixes politics and business like no other prime minister I've ever seen. We know that, President Lyndon Johnson had investments in helicopters that were used in Vietnam. That was a bit of a conflict of interest because they kept shipping more helicopters over to Nam during those years. But Carney makes Johnson look like an amateur in terms of mixing his political power with his economic strength. And Mark Carney's always been about enriching himself through the positions he's given. This is the first time he's actually been elected to a position. All the other ones were appointed, but he used those positions to enrich himself. And that is a scandal. There should be more anger about this from Canadians, that this guy is getting away with this. And we know BlackRock is intimately involved, is going to be intimately involved in the rebuilding of Ukraine if the Russians don't have another option. But the relationship between BlackRock and Brookfield is fascinating because Carney has got his hat in so many different rings, from the green energy cartel that he's basically designed and built, to his relationship to these other mega corporations that are making billions off of other people's suffering. And Brookfield is very good at that. I mean, we know that Brookfield has abused the clientele over the years. It is all about making money, and in many cases making money for Mark Carney. And this is a gross misuse of public office, gross misuse. And Carney is absolutely shameless about it. Totally shameless. He really thinks that there's really nothing going on here. And am I going to be making some money off of this? Well, probably, but that's life. That's, as he said during the election, he understands the real world, eh? And the real world is corruption. Mark Carney's corruption with a capital C.
At the end of the day, he was the special envoy for climate change at the UN, so it's no wonder he's the only leader right now that seems to be talking still about it. Brookfield has massive investment in renewable energy, So obviously he's pushing that. No wonder he wants EV mandates by 2035 here in Canada. So I don't know what it's going to take for the average Canadian to realize what's going on, because 100, what was the last number? 103 conflict of interest came out as per the commissioner, as per the ethics commissioner, and they just brushed it off like nothing was happening. It's just, oh, you know what? It is what it is. He put everything in a blind trust, so he doesn't know what his interests are. Absolutely insane. But one of the parts that we can blame the liberals, and we can blame the liberals and liberals, but when you and I first started this, we agreed that we would look at what the conservative can do. And when I say conservative, I'm talking small c, not the big C necessarily conservative party. But in this case, I'll be asking you about the big C conservative, because I haven't heard the conservative leader Pierre Poilievre speak about the fact that Carney, not only is he sending $2 billion more to Ukraine, but he said that he would put boots on the ground if needed. This is crickets. Yet military experts are like, what army? We don't have the capacity to put troops on the ground in the Ukraine. Even if you believe that was the right thing to do, let's play devil's advocate. We don't even have the effective to do it. So why are our conservative leaders or our conservative representative not talking about this? Why is it crickets once again from Pierre Poilievre and his team?
Well, Pierre Poilievre has been in lockstep with Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau on Ukraine. He was at that rally in Toronto standing next to Justin Trudeau and celebrating this war in Ukraine and how they're going to stand with Ukraine to the end. That literally could be the end. But the Ukrainian-Canadian vote is extremely strong in ridings across this country. But I had no idea. And I have Ukrainian lineage on my father's side. So, some people say I'm anti-Ukrainian. Well, and not at all. I don't think this is a war they ever could win. And I think Russia has completely right to say they can't become a member of NATO any more than Cuba could have nuclear missiles planted by the Soviet Union. And in 1962, it's no different. It's a proximity of power, and that's the reality. But clearly Poilievre has based his foreign policy on this war in Ukraine entirely on voting. And this seems because most Ukrainian Canadians, from my experience, are liberals. They've traditionally, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress has traditionally supported liberal candidates and liberal prime ministers. So I don't know why Polly is that worried about it. And I don't even know there's been no polling done actually in terms of the Ukrainian Canadian expectations about this. Do they really think this is a good thing to do, to continue to pour money into when the population is declining at a terrible rate like this? So I'm not even sure this is based on reality, but it's based entirely on a political anticipation or an expectation on Poilievre's part. And I have been encouraging him to get some courage on this file and realize that you stop echoing what the Liberal Party has been saying about Ukraine now for 3 years, and because grassroots conservatives, I know, and I hear comments from them all the time, don't support this war in Ukraine. Don't support pouring billions of dollars of bad money after bad. And I know Zelensky is a corrupt president of a corrupt regime. So I think this is very, very feeble in terms of Poilievre not having the courage to stand up for something that is clearly in the best interests of Canadians as a whole. That we have got to stop dispensing cash to this war, and we've got to work to a cessation of hostilities. But at the same time, realize that we are not going to be dictating any of these terms. It's just not going to happen. That's not the real world. But Poilievre continues to blather on about that as well, just the same way that Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau did. You have to remember, it's Trudeau that first said that he was guaranteeing Ukraine's sovereignty. With what? We're a non-nuclear power to begin with, even though we used to have U.S. nuclear weapons on our soil. However, we don't have an armed forces that's even credible on the world stage in terms of flexing any kind of military might or threatening or getting our way. So guarantee the sovereignty? Yeah, I mean, sure, you can say that. And Mark Carney said it again this week. Canada is going to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty. What a joke. It's just words. It means nothing because we can't back it up. We can't deliver on that pledge or that promise. All we can do is talk about it and sound like we're really nice guys. But it's, if anything, it's delivering a false hope that we can't possibly accommodate. So,
or virtue signaling.
I've been consistently critical of the Conservative Party for not taking a more principled stand on this issue and just echoing and mirroring the government's position. And I think it's a mistake. But they're continuing. You're right. Not a word from Poilievre about this week. So I have to assume he's all for it. Yeah, let's put some boots on the ground. Well, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I agree. Their sons and daughters should be the first one to go. If you agree with that, it's your sons and daughters. And by the way, I've been talking about this a lot on social media this week, and I've got quite a few comments that are telling me that we need to help in this and blah, 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 blah. And my comment has always been the same. Just so you know, Ukraine will accept foreign fighters within their army. So if you really want to help Ukraine, no problem. You can go right now and Zelensky will take you. So if you really mean what you mean, if you really want to put some action behind those words, go for it. Zelensky is waiting for you. But I didn't realize that there was that many Ukrainians in Canada. It's estimated, as per 2022, 1.36 million, or about 4% of the Canadian population. That's crazy. That's insane. Yeah, I didn't realize there were that many.
And very, very politically motivated and mobilized. And like I said, it's largely been for the Liberal Party. And so
that
I
makes
think
sense.
Well, it doesn't make any sense at all. But it's almost like they all agreed to this. And there has been, if you disagree with this chronic dispensing of money, that you're Putin's puppet or you're anti-Ukrainian, and there's never been a rational discourse allowed in this country. If you're in any way critical of the official narrative from the government, then you're accused of being in the pocket of Russia. It's absolutely insane.
Mark Carney celebrated on the same day that it was in the Ukraine. He sent a video celebrating the Ukraine independence, saying that, like Canada, they stand for democracy. I'm like, Zelensky was elected in 2019. Since 2022, the country has been under martial law, which means he literally got rid of the Ukrainian constitution and is the definition of a dictator.
Yeah.
Yet Carney is saying that we stand with Ukraine in solidarity because they're a free country. They're a constitutional country. They, like, what am I hearing? Like, how are people taking this? How are people accepting those words? Because look at the definition of a dictator. Zelensky fits every single point. And we all know what would happen right now if he did like Trump asked. How about you have an election? If you want us to continue sending you money, because that's basically what he said this week, right? If you want us to continue sending you money, have an election. You know that that's not going to happen. The day there's an election in Ukraine, he's disappearing.
I really do think Zelensky is actively concerned about his exile if he actually gets that far. There could be a worse fate for him in the next couple of weeks. But I think he's actively looking for an exit plan to get out. He's got real estate all over the world, including Florida, Vero Beach, I understand.
Does he
And
really?
he's
In
yeah,
Florida?
he's he's looking for an exit strategy here, because I think he's enough of a realist, even though he's another bloody actor in politics. He's enough of a realist to understand that he's in a very dangerous position right now, and he could be removed from power by his own people because his time is over. It's time to move on. And I think he's smart enough to realize that. But so he continues to smoke screen about, we're going to keep fighting. I intend to stay as president, but he's locked up his political opponents. There's no opposition in Ukraine. He's locked up and he's harassed and persecuted the Christian churches in Ukraine, including the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He has completely marginalized large segments of the population. He's recruiting 60 to 65-year-old men for the army, 16-year-old boys and girls for the army, people with mental illness. You're all fair game in Ukraine to go into the army, get no training at all, go to the front lines and get killed. And I heard today that for every Russian that's dying in this war, 19 or 20 Ukrainians are dying. And you have to remember that's not just incredibly horrible figures for Ukraine. Usually the country that's on the defense is the country that's losing less people, because it's a lot more costly generally to be on the offensive. You're going to lose more people. Not the case here. So when you're down to the remnants of your population, when you're sending old men and boys and girls into the army to die within a day, within a week, because they don't even know what they're doing. Sometimes they're not even trained to fire weapons. This is criminal. This is criminal behavior from a criminal president. And for this punk to jet set around the world in his faux combat gear or athletic wear, I'm not sure what it is half the time, and to pretend he's Churchill reborn. It is infuriating, because so many people have fallen for this act, and that's all it is. He's an actor, like Justin Trudeau. That's why the two of them got along so well. You remember that heart-wrenching moment when they met in the street there, they embraced. I mean, it was just nauseating, but that's the two of them understood each other very well.
There was something almost sexual about that hug. That hug was woof. There was something going on behind the scene before or after that hug. I don't know when it was, but there was something strange going on there. But how long do you think he has? Because he's been pushing it, because it's since 2019 that he's been in power. He's been the president under martial law for 3 years now. And if Donald Trump, if the US stops sending money, because they've sent somewhere around $176 billion to $200 billion, like the figure is around there somewhere. If they say no more, hold an election, Zelensky's screwed. So that he won't have a choice to leave. Do you think that's coming? Like you said, a couple of weeks. You think that's that fast?
I can't see him staying there until Christmas. I can tell you that. I think he'd be lucky to stay to Halloween, which is probably his time of year. But I can't see him. I can't see the Ukrainian oligarchs putting up with him much longer. And I think that's what it comes down to. And I think I can't see the CIA putting up with him much longer. And you have to remember the 2014 coup was CIA engineered. So when the CIA is done with you, when the U.S. State Department is finished with you, it's over. And either you get out of the country of your own volition, or you mysteriously disappear and die. And this has happened in countless regime changes over the years. And I think the Americans have had enough of Zelensky. And I think his support is very, very tenuous. And I can't see him staying. I think for for the sake of his own preservation, I think he'll get out of the country first. But God only knows, because power corrupts. We all know that. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I also think it destroys the brain cells, because these people start to believe they're invincible and that they can get through this one. And no, I don't need American support. I don't need the CIA or MI6 support. I can go it alone. And you guys just go to hell, and I'm in charge here. I'm going to start to believe my own publicity. And when they do that, that's very dangerous, because they really don't think that they can be stopped. And yeah, they can be very, very easy, and it can happen within a few days. It can happen that quickly. So it really, really depends upon how much Zelensky has outstayed his welcome. And I think that's quite severe at this point. And it's not getting any better for him. And the war is not going to get any better for Ukraine. I don't know how they're even mounting any kind of offensive. You know, they have that honor guard in Kiev the other day for Carney when he was in town, and that's probably, you know, the best, the tallest, the most fit soldiers that they have left. I don't know where they found them, but they gathered up the best they could find, 25 of these guys, put them in their in fresh uniforms, have them march around, but that's probably it. that's the remnants of the Ukrainian army. So it's it's a very sad state of affairs for everybody. But of course, the people who suffer the most are the ones who are completely in process. The people who are being recruited off the streets, shoved into cars, and thrown into the front to die. That's who's suffering the most in this.
Yeah, when you're saying recruiting, you mean kidnapped. You mean forced.
Yeah, they're being shanked.
Yeah.
Shanghai. Yeah. And that is criminal behavior. But of course, for people like Zelensky and Carney and Trudeau and Macron and Starmer, they don't give a damn about these people. They don't care about human life, because they're all making money off this. They're making money off this war. I mean, that is the sad truth here. And that's how tragic this is. Benefiting and profiting off of people's abject suffering. That is criminal behavior, and criminal with a capital C, corruption with a capital C, and it's very sad.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's always something that's hard for people to understand. Like my co-host on the Political Orphans doesn't want to believe that humans can be that evil towards other human, and I try to explain to him all the time that if you do not see other people as your equal, you're not going to have a problem doing this. In the same way as you look at animals, you look at a cockroach, you look at an insect, you have no problem swashing an insect, killing it, because it's not your equal. And as soon as you start to realize that those guys don't see me and you as their equals, we're not part of that club, they don't care about us at all. So what they can do, the type of evil that they can do, is limitless.
Yes, it is. And I think it's also where they are theologically. These are people who really don't believe in a God that is capable of judging mankind. That they invent their own gods. They worship their own gods, and whether it's the money that they're amassing, or in some cases, I think this is satanic and demonic, where these people are coming from. I think that's a large spiritual reasons are a large part of this problem, and we're finally addressing that. We're finally I hear increasing number of pundits, you know, Tucker Carlson for one, who's identifying the evil in the world for what it is. It is satanic, and this is why we have people like Epstein who had so many people, high rollers, influential people in his circle, and he was able to corrupt them to a point where they were in his pocket. And there's no doubt in my mind that there's a spiritual realm to all of this, and I think that's why these people act without any conscience. They have none. They have no conscience left, and they do they look at humanity as something to be utilized and abused for their own good, for their own profit. And that's what is so alarming about all of this. And this is why the constant need for distraction. So that we're just focus on this and don't ask any questions about the larger picture, because you won't like the answers.
I like this comment. Cheryl McDonald is saying they're not delusional. They know exactly what they're doing. And this is where I agree 100%. This is not a coincidence. Those people are not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing, and people keep falling for it. And I agree with you that there is a spiritual war going on. And I always say this to people, but there's a spiritual war going on, and like it or not, you're involved. You're picking a choice, you're picking a side every single day. And those people know exactly what they're doing. This to me is sacrifices. They have to repay the debt for what they were given in life. There's a cost to the power that they have. There's a cost to it, and we're the one paying it. So, but again, that's a hard conversation to have with the average individual that doesn't believe in God.
Yeah, it's a very hard conversation. But I think even if you don't believe in God, I think you have to acknowledge the existence of evil, and it's
Mhm.
almost easier to acknowledge that because we see it all over the world today. And I would agree with the comment there as well. I mean, I say, it looks delusional. It seems to be delusional. It certainly is in terms of a clinical analysis of that behavior. It is clearly delusional. But yeah, they've got their own agenda, and they're playing us. They have been playing us time after time here, with whether it was the COVID pandemic or the war in Ukraine. We're being played. We're being used, and it's the amount of ignorance in the public response to all of this has just been jarring. But yeah, of course they know what they're doing. I mean, these are not stupid people. I think they're corrupt and they're evil people, but they have a plan, they have an agenda, and they're working through this. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to suffer as a result of their plan. But that doesn't bother them. That doesn't bother them at all. But wanted to mention before I forget. I don't know if you saw Poilievre's presser today. I think he was in PEI. And I was just about to go on the air when I noticed that Poilievre was doing this news conference. And it was interesting because he's revealed that Carney has in fact reinstated the carbon tax. Just called it a new name. It's called the Safe Fuel Regulation, I think.
Hold on, there's a comment. There's a comment right here. Dr. Wally Barfrey is saying that it's called the Clean Fuel Standard. I Googled it earlier, and that's how it's called. He's actually absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah, and it's 17 cents a liter. Exactly what the carbon tax. So once again, should I be shocked? Should I be surprised? I really thought Carney would leave that one alone, because he's also pushing the what's the industrial carbon tax, for company the corporate carbon tax, and he's also still talking about the carbon tax levy, which will be like a carbon tax tariff, which he brought up during the campaign. So now he's gonna go back to the other carbon tax as well. So we're gonna hit with 3 of these. Sure, why not? Because you cannot believe anything Mark Carney says, and he essentially admitted that last week. I did a whole show on that where he said, "Yeah, I lied to you all during the election campaign about Donald Trump being an existential threat to Canada. We're the best of buddies, and the U.S. Yeah, we got a great free trade deal with the U.S. I made it all up." He admitted that. Even the reporters, the usual suspects from CBC, Global, CTV, even they felt a little bit used by this man, because essentially saying, so you really just use this as a political ploy. You got elected under false pretenses. And Carney is literally reading from a script that clearly he has trouble reading it, because it's so laughably stupid. How could you come up with a story like this? And he's having trouble reading his own talking points because they're so laughably stupid. But he got through the news conference, and is there any real punishment from the media for the press corps in the country? No, they're going to let him continue to get away with this outrageous corruption. But incredible story to me. But yeah, he's brought it back. Just change the name of it.
Did you see this video? This video was I saw this video yesterday. We talked about it on the show earlier, but I wanted to show you this because this is CBC, one of the panelists from Power and Politics. Listen to what she said about Carney. I had problems, I had to triple, quadruple check that this was CBC because what she's saying is absolutely true. This is the most truth I've ever heard on CBC at once. Listen to this.
Saying it is not complex, but the Prime Minister campaigned and won an election on being the guy to get a deal done, being the one to negotiate with Trump. That is how he positioned himself in the election campaign. So we are now a quarter in to this mandate, and Canadians do not have anything to show in terms of a trade agreement. So the government has indexed heavily to showing progress on international trade and on the Canada-US relationship. There's nothing there to show. Meanwhile, they've left themselves exposed on domestic policy. We're nowhere on housing, crime, immigration, affordability. So unless you're going to deliver on the former to try and offset the latter, then you find yourself empty-handed in both instances. And so I think to your question, when does the Prime Minister need to show progress? I would say if there's not significant progress on Canada-US trade and some of these international deals with tangible commitments, not just commitments to commit in the future and MOUs, by the end of this year, I think Canadians are really going to be wondering what it is that they voted for back in the spring.
We have to.
Kate Harrison.
Yeah, I did watch that this week, and that's frank, candid, and entirely accurate. This is a guy who was elected under false pretenses. Of course, I'm glad there hasn't been the Conservative Party coming out and saying we should be getting with those retaliatory tariffs. Probably has really tiptoed around this one because he knows retaliatory tariffs are bad news for Canadians. All they are is taxes. They're just more taxes on Canadians. So this was the right thing to do. It's just that Carney lied about what he was going to do. Carney has completely misrepresented who he is, what he's going to do as Prime Minister, and he bald-faced lies about it. And this is the issue here: is that he got away with completely fabricating his intentions. So if you're a Canadian, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, maybe the honeymoon is over. We saw that poll from Abacus, and generally Abacus was a little more accurate than the other pollsters during the election campaign because it was a closer race than let's say Angus Reid was assessing it was. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that the voter support for the Liberals seems to be declining. We'll see if that's a trend in the next poll that comes out, or if Abacus's findings are correlated by any other pollsters in Canada, most of whom I really don't trust. But we'll see what happens. It seems I can't see why anybody is still enchanted with Mark Carney. Well, because the joke now is net zero means you get nothing from Mark. It is net zero. There's a big goose egg here. He cannot achieve any objectives that he has promised to achieve, and he comes up with a big fat zero every time. So I don't know why there would be any commitment by Canadians to give him another chance. But clearly, there's enough people out there who still think this is a competent man who's doing a competent job and not not just working for himself. This is a first-class grifter who will use his positions for his own power and enrichment. So who knows? Maybe that message is gradually getting out there too. But I'm not optimistic about Canadian voters. They bought this line during the election campaign. Enough Canadians really thought he was going to deliver on any of this nonsense, even though it was undeliverable. So we'll see. But I'm not overly optimistic about Canadian voters right now. I haven't been for quite some time.
But hold on, I want to make sure I understood you properly. You said that you don't that Polyev did not call for dollar tariff, because he did during his campaign. That was one of his campaign points. He wanted
Yeah, he did.
to put.
You're right.
Okay.
I'm saying this week he has tiptoed around that.
Yeah.
Very,
Okay, I thought you were saying
very
that
careful.
Yeah, because he did talk about it during the campaign. Like he did the same thing as Carney. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page here. But there's something that was published this morning, because I follow a lot of leftists, a lot of woke people. I follow because they have massive audiences, and I want to see the lies that they sell their people. And I saw a post this morning, and it's basically an article, and money.ca made an article about it too, but it's basically saying that for the first time in July, for the first time in 5 years, there was more Americans coming here to Canada than Canadians going to the US on vacation or just crossing the border. And the left is celebrating this, like Carney's doing something right. He's attracting Americans to Canada, and Canadians are refusing to go to the US to fight Trump. And then I'm like, hey guys, hold on here. What are you saying? Our dollar is tanking. We're at 139 of the American. So $1 American is worth almost $1.4 Canadian, meaning that it's a massive discount for them to come up here. Not only that, but 1 out of 4 Canadians is struggling to pay daily necessities. There's reports out there showing that it was something insane, like almost 50% of people can't afford to spend $500 on an emergency. If something were to happen, they're so tight that $500 would be a problem. And something like 69% of Canadians are rethinking their vacation, that they just can't afford it and they're going to spend the money somewhere else. And we're celebrating the fact that somehow Carney is winning because Canadians are not going down south and Americans are coming to Canada. We really live in a Twilight Zone, a bad Twilight Zone episode, or Black Mirror now, I think is the cool name for those series. But they will do anything to spin that around into a win. And people are just believing this, like, ooh, elbows up.
Elbows up, man. No, he's never had his elbows up. I just hate that expression. It was just so childish, but indicative of the whole Liberal campaign, which was a childish campaign. But so it's good news. Canadians aren't going south of the border. Yeah, I wonder if the dollar has something to do with it. Yeah, it certainly must have something to do with that decision. When you can't afford to live in Canada, it's even can't afford. When you got 60 cents on the dollar, that's really not helping you. So, and it's a great incentive for Americans to come up here, of course, because their dollar's worth a lot more. So, I certainly haven't been traveling in the States as much as I used to, and I used to go down for extended periods of time. But it's our dollar has tanked. We have a very weak economy, and we're on the brink of complete catastrophe, economic catastrophe, and God only knows if people think it's bad now, it can get worse. But you're right about how the spin doctors in the Liberal Party will reach at anything and try to justify Carney's bizarre behavior, really, by saying, "Oh, Canadians aren't going to the States anymore." It's just like Doug Ford banning bourbon and California Reds, and that had nothing to do with the trade war. That was a complete, potentially illegal thing to do, because they taking that off the shelf has nothing to do with putting a tariff on it. That was a deliberate move against the U.S., and of course they resented that very much. But that's not a legitimate trade tactic to do that sort of thing. But Doug Ford really is tied to no ideology except Doug Fordism now, and it's whatever he has to do to I think advance to the next stage. And I think he's got his eye on the Conservative Party leadership. Clearly, the way he has been negotiating himself and his. I think that's the direction he's going in. But I have been. I wonder some days who I'm more furious with, Doug Ford or Mark Carney. Or it's a toss-up at times, but certainly Ford has done everything possible to destroy small C conservatives in Ontario.
I would argue that Ford works for Carney, because just what he said last week after Pierre Poilievre got reelected, he was asked, he's like, are you going to reach out to Pierre Poilievre and have a conversation with him? And he's like, no, I won't. But if I can tell him something, is that he really needs to get behind Mark Carney, because what he's doing is right. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. Those were not his exact words, but he's basically saying that he's behind Carney and so should Pierre Poilievre. Yet there was Abacus data that released a poll, I think it was yesterday, showing that conservatives have twice the amount of votes right now. If they were to vote, if there was a voting, if there was an election right now, the conservatives are leading by a half. I think it was 26 or 27% for the Liberal and something like 53% for the conservatives. And my co-host is like, how's that possible? I'm like, well, if you understand that Ontario is a very liberal province, but Doug Ford's not a conservative. So obviously they're okay with what he's doing because he's not a conservative. He's just another liberal in a blue suit.
Yeah, Ford, his exact words were, Mark Carney's doing a really, really good job. and we should all jump on board. And Poilievre should allow himself to be co-opted and just to work with the government, keep your mouth shut. And I thought, this guy is just a total fraud.
What were you going to say? You can say it.
I was going to say monster, but it is incredible to me that he has I won't call it audacity or nerve or stupidity to describe anything Carney's doing as really, really good, because it's really, really good for the benefit of Mark Carney, but it's not really good for the benefit of Canadians. So, but that was an incredible statement, just an incredible statement. I don't care about what your political stripe is. Oh, okay.
Yes, that's true. He said that.
What if I'm a communist? Do you work with me too?
Okay.
You don't care about my political stripe. All right.
No, we just need to rally behind Mark Carney. It's pretty bad when you start wishing for Rob Ford, the crack smoking mayor of Toronto. You start saying, maybe he would have done a better MP. He would have done a better job at running Ontario than his brother.
I think
that's
he would
pretty sad.
I do. I think Rob Ford had a lot more principled conservative beliefs and understood real people much more than Doug Ford is. Doug Ford is so divorced from reality. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand average Canadians or average Ontarians, and they're so far removed from that. But I think his brother did. But yeah, it is pretty crazy. You're harkening back to the days when Rob Ford was mayor of Toronto, because he did show a lot more honesty, I think, in the end. Which is, honesty is not a word that Doug Ford's well acquainted with.
Nope, I agree with you 100%. But it just shows you how bad it is when CBC's calling out Carney, and I'm wishing for Rob Ford to run the Conservative Party of Ontario.
Yeah.
Well, you have to be able to laugh at it. But I wanted to show you one more video. It'll take 2 seconds. I know we're running out of time right now, but I wanted to show this one because I wish that she would run for the Conservative Party, like the federal Conservative Party. I don't see it happening. Obviously, she is way too busy in Alberta, but this is I don't know if you saw that from Danielle Smith. It was, I believe it was at the end of last week, but she said this, and again, I think some of my listeners say that I have a political crush, and that would be her. I just like her. I can't help it. But here's what she had to say.
We had an immigration system we were also proud of because it was working so well up until the most recent couple of years. If we could just go back to having a more normal number of newcomers coming into the country, like 1% even, we would bring down the social tension, and we would be able to accommodate everyone who came here. And so this is the issue. It's a matter of the numbers. So if we had 1% of the population per year coming to Alberta, that'd be about 50,000 a year. We've had 450,000 come in the last 3 years. This is the reason why people are feeling like we might have a little bit of problem at the federal level with the numbers that are coming into the country. It is not an anti-immigrant sentiment. It is a matter of what is the right level and what can we absorb. I know we had.
So all to say that I would go even further than her. I want to close the borders. I want us to reassess our whole immigration system to see what we have to do to make it better, because we had Dr. Watley on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he said something that blew my mind. He said that you cannot be a welfare state and have open borders. You can either have one or the two, but you cannot be both. And unfortunately, Canada is a welfare state and we have open borders policies, so we're getting screwed. So I think that she's not conservative enough in her statement, but can you imagine at least if Poliev would talk like her? At least if he would at least talk like that.
Yeah, I would love to see that day come, but once again, Danielle is the leader of principled conservatism in this country. There's no question about that, and every time she opens her mouth, she seems to confirm that for me, because I have a lot of time for Danielle, known her for a long time, and I think she's one of the few politicians I actually respect. I think she's doing a damn good job, and I think she's doing everything she can. And it takes courage even to say that much, and it shouldn't. And that's just common sense. It took courage for Danielle Smith to stand behind Sean Foyt when he came to Edmonton and to perform on the steps of the legislature. It took courage to do that, to stand up for freedom of religion. Shouldn't take courage to stand up for freedom of religion, but unfortunately it does in this country because we're so screwed. And I respected her for that. She was the only premier or political leader to come out and enthusiastically support freedom of religion and what Sean was doing in Canada. And I thought that was fantastic. Not a word, once again, from our friend here about that. Not a word. He totally avoided talking about it.
And you don't need to be a Christian to endorse Sean Foyt to say, you don't need to like the music. You don't even need to like the guy. It's religious freedom. If Muslims are able to close off Yonge and Bloor in Toronto because they want to pray in the middle of the street, that's okay. They get protected by police. But Sean Foyt can't speak about Jesus. He can't sing about Jesus after applying for permits. Yeah. This is not courage. This is two-tier policing that we have here. And Danielle Smith just saying, okay, well, you can do it. It blows my mind because, again, I completely agree with you. There's nothing courageous about saying we have freedom of religion because we're supposed to. But here we are when nobody talks about it except Daniels. Nobody endorses him except Danielle Smith. But yeah, I like her. I just can't help myself. She's flawed. There's things I don't agree with her, but at the same time, she seems to have the most common sense in a politician in Canada. So
yes, totally agree.
Well, David, we're 3 minutes over, but I think it was a good 3 minutes. I think that we needed to finish on a good note, at least one good note today. So I'm gonna thank you for your time once again. We'll be doing this Wednesday next week once again. I want to thank all the commenters. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Have a good night.
Okay, you betcha. Been a pleasure. Bye for now.
Always a pleasure, David.